Hello beautiful people, and welcome back to another video. If you missed the previous video where I talked about my book getting shortlisted in the 2024 Wattpad Awards, then you hopefully watched all the way through and caught some of the writing advice that I dropped. Well, this video will kind of be continuing on that topic, and I'll be talking about a writing method that I recently discovered but has been around for a while that I feel like it'll help some of you who may want to get into plotting your stories, especially those of you who may be pantsers. But if you aren't sure how or where to start when it comes to plotting, then this method might help you. So it doesn't matter if you're a pantser or if you've been a long time plotter. If you've ever struggled with outlining your books, then this video is for you. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be talking about the Snowflake method. It's a very simple step-by-step process that turns a basic idea into a detailed outline. It's all about starting small and adding layers until you have a fully fleshed out outline. That is a tongue twister. I don't want to mispronounce the person's name, but the Snowflake method was created by the name that you see on the screen. And I'm slightly embarrassed to admit that for as long as I've been writing, I only just recently learned about the Snowflake method a couple of weeks ago. But I tried it out, and when I tested it out when I wanted to expand a novella that I was working on into a full-length novel. And I kid you not, once I started working on that by the morning, by mid-afternoon, I had a whole fully plotted book out in like 25 chapters when I only started out with 7 chapters in the original novella. So following the Snowflake method was a lot easier, and it was actually a little bit fun to do compared to the somewhat hectic way that I have been plotting my stories up until this point. So as you can see on the screen, the Snowflake method consists of about 7 to 8 steps depending on which template you Googled online. Hopefully you read the disclaimer that I posted in the beginning of the video. There are various different ways that you can follow the Snowflake method. The version that I'm going to be covering in this video is what works best for me, and hopefully it'll work for you, but if not, you can always search on Google for alternatives. So first things first, you'll want to summarize your story in 1 sentence. I know that sounds daunting, but before you freak out, I promise it's really simple. So we're going to do this together, and the example that I'm going to use for this video is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, the first book. So, for example, to summarize that book in 1 sentence, it could be something like, a clueless young girl falls in love with a mysterious vampire, and she's completely unaware of the dangers that come with his world. That's literally it. So let's go ahead and move on to step 2. So for step 2, you'll need to expand that sentence into a full paragraph, not multiple paragraphs, just 1 paragraph. So think of it like your story's elevator pitch. Like if you're on the elevator with someone and you're striking up a conversation, but your floor is approaching and you need to exit soon. How would you pitch your story to get them to read it? That's what an elevator pitch is. So continuing to use Twilight as an example, it would look something like this. So looking at that paragraph, you introduce the protagonist and their world, which is Bella and her small town. You also have the inciting incident, which typically happens in the beginning of the story, sometimes in the first chapter, but not always. So that would be when Edward and Bella meet for the first time. And you also briefly explain the main conflict as well, which is Bella discovering that the boy that she has a crush on is actually a vampire and supernaturals exist. And also adding to the conflict, Bella is now put in danger after learning of Edward's true identity in the supernatural world. So how will she address this conflict? Well, she has to fight to stay alive, and Edward has to help her, along with some other things in the background. So you don't necessarily have to give everything away in your paragraph summary, but as long as you get out all the main points that's going to happen in your story, then later on as we go through the rest of the Snowflake method, we'll dive deeper and expand on each of those points. So let's go ahead and move on to step 3. So now it's time to bring your characters to life. So for this step, you need to write a 1-page summary for each major character in your story. So try to include their motivations, their goals, their conflicts, their appearance, if you do that, how they change throughout the story, and etc. The character arcs, all that good stuff. So like, what is their name? Why are they important to the plot? Who's going to be the love interest to the main character? Are there multiple love interests? Try to answer these types of questions because your characters are literally the heart of your novel. And if you have weak characters, then you're going to have a weak story, and your readers are definitely going to notice. So please take your time with this step. And if you need a guide, you can use the one on screen. And I do want to take this time to preface here that there are many different ways that you can customize the Snowflake method to your liking. I said that at the beginning. If you skip the disclaimer, I'm saying it again now for the third time. So when I show you examples or give you guides like the one that you see on screen right now, you don't have to follow these exactly like it's set in stone, because it is not. I don't fill out all of these every time I'm plotting out a story. It's not a requirement. It's just a general guide for you to go on. So based on your book and how deep your idea is, you can customize this and add or take away whatever you like. Just as long as you're following the basic outline of the Snowflake method, you should be okay, and the process should be easier for you compared to having to do all this from scratch with no guide at all. Alright, so let's move on to step 4. Now this is where we're going to expand that one paragraph summary into a one-page synopsis. Can a synopsis be more than one page? Sure it can. Should it be more than 5 pages? Now you're probably overdoing it. So try to stay within the 1 to 2 page range for this part. This is also where you'll outline all the major plot points, including what happens in the beginning, middle, and the end of your story. This is also where you want to include all spoilers from your story. For my visual folks, we're going to continue with the example of using Twilight. And I found a good synopsis from the website listed on the screen, which is also in the description box below. So this kind of shows you how detailed you should be when it comes to creating a synopsis. I also have some other resources listed in the description as well about how to craft a good synopsis. So check those out if you don't know where to start. Now it's time to create a scene list. Since we've already fleshed out our characters and we have a pretty good foundation laid for how we want our story to go from the beginning to the middle to the end. So basically when creating a scene list, you're kind of taking the main points from the synopsis and expanding them just a little bit. So remember when I just said you don't need to have like a 5-page synopsis? Well, this is where you can circle back to add those extra details that you didn't necessarily need to have in your synopsis. So having a scene list where you can expand on the major parts of your story helps you to better visualize the flow of your story and also spot any potential plot holes that may pop up. So if you're looking at the example on the screen, it pretty much hits all the major points that happens in book 1 of the Twilight series. I'm not going to go in and expand on each of these points because we don't, this, you know, it's you guys get how it works. I don't want to take up any more of your time today. So I'm not going to go in and expand on each of these points, but you kind of get the idea of what you need to do. So hopefully you're able to execute that successfully with your story. Moving on to step 6. Now that you have everything required to make a good, well thought out story, it's time for the fun part. At least to me, this is the fun part, and that would be creating a chapter by chapter outline of your novel. You don't have to know right off the bat how many chapters your book will have as you started the Snowflake method. You can just come in with a general idea of your idea, how you want things to go, and then you can figure the rest out later. So you don't have to know how many chapters your book needs to have by this step, because no one knows. We're going to figure it out as we're writing the outline. So circling back to your synopsis and your scene list, this is where you need to break it all down even further, point by point, chapter by chapter, scene by scene. Combine it all, break it down. And also this is the point where you need to keep in the back of your mind the pacing of your story. This is something that even professional authors struggle with. So when you're breaking everything down chapter by chapter, just make sure you're not going too fast and you're not going too slow, and make sure something is happening that moves the plot along in every chapter. And by that I mean if you're going to introduce your love interest in chapter 1, then the reader needs to see them again at some point before chapter 10. So try to steer clear of having too many fluff chapters. And if you don't know what a fluff chapter is, it's basically a chapter where nothing of importance is happening and the author is just trying to take up space or add unnecessary words to meet their word count. But what I do know is that you don't need to have too many of these chapters in your book, and you definitely don't need to have them back to back, because to most readers it can be a turnoff and they might DNF your book if the plot gets lost and things become too boring or too confusing to follow along. And we finally made it to the end of the Snowflake method, and now that you have a detailed roadmap, it's time to start writing your first draft. So with your outline in place, the actual writing process should be much smoother now that you know where to go and where to start and how things are going to end. So please don't worry about trying to get things perfect on the first try with your first draft. The Snowflake method is extremely flexible, so like I mentioned before, adjust things however you like. The overall goal is to give yourself a clear path from a basic, simple little baby idea to a finished, polished draft. And that pretty much wraps up the Snowflake method, you guys. I'll leave a template for the outline used in this video in the description box below. So if you're watching this on desktop, you should be able to copy and paste straight from the description box. And if you're on Android or iPhone and you're on the latest versions, you should also be able to copy and paste directly from your the app. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you have something in mind that you'd like to see me cover or go in depth about, then comment below. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next video.